So in a bid to make a Victorian tea gown, I've decided I probably need the proper undergarments to go with it. So today we'll be documenting the making of a circa 1840s, which transformed into like basically my very extensive modifications to a Victorian corset. Yeah, that's what we're making today. Okay, so this morning, or rather this afternoon, we're going to be attempting to draft a 1840s French days from page 73 of Corsets and Crinolines by Norwood for an upcoming semi-Victorian project that I want to do. So we've got materials we'll need, the cutouts. This book isn't really scaled, it just gives you a small ruler here to determine where all your points are. So it's going to be a little bit of a trick drafting this, but we will see what we can do. Okay, so based on their little ruler here, that's 9 1/4 inches, which on actual ruler is going to be about 2 7/8. So 9.25 equals 2 7/8. And I don't know what 7 divided by 8 is. .88. So in the interest of not driving myself absolutely crazy trying to figure out what these little measurements all turn out to be, I'm just going to math it. Although that one looks to be about 3 inches there. So the curves, I'll go ahead and use this little guy. So I did not, in fact, math on this. I just continued using the scaled ruler that was already included with the pattern diagram. Each little square, I think, equated to 1 inch. So I just used it to measure the curves, and it was much easier to measure the curves with that scaled ruler. And then from there, I just kind of eyeballed it until I figured out the general proportions. To get the angle of all the curves correct, given that I was working off of a very probably inaccurate pattern scale, what I did was I took points and I measured, okay, how far away was the outermost edge point from the top one. I just drew a line and then measured across. And then the furthest inner curve, how far away from that straight line is that, to get just kind of a general idea of where the curves were. And once I got the general math correct, I just eyeballed it when I drew the curve to make sure it looked correct. And I'm pretty sure somebody out there is cringing at this method, but you know what? It worked for me, and it still ended up being a better pattern than any commercial patterns that I've already tried. It gave me a much better shape and a much more accurate shape than purchased patterns did. Or at least the ones I've tried. So I also made a point to go ahead and transfer the boning channels to the pattern pieces themselves, because I know that is fairly important when it comes to getting the proper shape, is the placement and the angle of the boning channels. In this case, the boning channel seems to be at the seams, with only just a couple actually running through the panels themselves. One thing to keep in mind about corsets is it's not the boning that makes the shape, it's the patterning. So with any kind of fitted garments, we need to make a mock-up first. For this one, I just used a yard of cotton canvas that I have because it's a more heavily structured fabric, and it'll give me a better indication of how the actual corset will act without having to spend money on couture. Okay, so for the 1890s corset that has time traveled back in time to 1840s, because I just liked that style better. This was the original pattern that I pulled from Nora Woe, and then I went ahead and lengthened and widened the pattern pieces. So I added, I think about, it was originally 2 inches, so I think it's down to an inch and a half to lengthen it, because I wanted it to be a little bit longer. And then I added a 1/4 inch to each panel to give me this. So this is the mock-up version of it, and I really quite like it. I think the fit is really good, almost exactly where I need it to be. I think it is still just a tiny bit too big, but like nothing that I can't fix by just increasing the seam allowance a hair. Yeah, and maybe actually lacing it properly this go around. So I am very quite happy with this, and this is probably what we will end up going with. So I don't think I'll do another mock-up on this. I think I'll go ahead and order the couture that I'm going to use. Now I just need to decide on the color. Do I want everything to coordinate, or do I just want it to be white, or maybe a bone color? I don't know, I need to decide on what color scheme I'm going to go with for this. I really like the look of white, but the combinations are going to be an off-white. Don't know. Probably stick with the off-white, because the tea gown is going to be beige and gold, so probably stick with the off-white color. So yeah, now I'm going to go and buy some couture. Actually, proper couture this time and not cotton, well, maybe not. I think I'll probably just buy some cotton twill, because for some ridiculous reason, couture has like skyrocketed in price for some unfathomable reason. I think I remember it being like $12 a yard, and now it's like $30 a yard, and I can't understand why, because why? I don't know. So we might just be El Cheapo and go with some cotton twill. Just as a side note, I do understand the difference between cotton twill and cotton couture. I know it's a stronger weave, and I know it doesn't stretch as much as cotton twill, but I also don't care. So I ended up going with neither option. Instead, I decided to go with a white cotton sateen and a pale gold silk satin, because I was convinced that if I was going to make something that nice, might as well make it nice. So I then went ahead and moved on to cutting out the cotton sateen, not just once, but twice, because I cut it out wrong the first time. And I chose to cut out the cotton sateen first, just so I could make myself comfortable with the shapes before cutting into the far more expensive silk faced satin, which was a good decision to make, considering I cut out the cotton sateen incorrectly the first go around, which was a mistake I did not want to make on the silk. I also made a point to go ahead and add in the seam allowance, because the paper pattern didn't actually account for seam allowance on this. So I did make some fit adjustments to the mock-up pattern, and it ended up making the corset fit a little bit not quite the way I wanted it to, which you'll find out later. So I have brought it to my own attention that I actually added width to each panel on this, and I was actually not supposed to. I made a mental note to remove 1/8 of an inch from each side of each panel, not add it. So now these panels are extra big and I need to remark them and do that. So I'm glad I made the decision to cut them out of the cotton sateen before cutting them out of the satin, but here we are. So now I'm gonna go ahead and correct that. Yeah. So I have a bit of a situation, and that is that I have cleaned my sewing room. It is all nice and tidy and pretty, and I have more fabric from my trip that I still need to bolt. I think I only managed to bolt the wool, which is up there now. And I have hung my 2 pretty pictures. And I have more fabric to bolt, but in order to bolt that fabric, I'm going to have to create more bolts, which I don't feel like doing. Or I could fold it, if it's small enough cuts, which I think they are, and put them in my little cubby system right behind me. But that would require going in and cleaning out all of my cubbies, which I don't want to do, or cleaning out my little art supplies cart, which one of the cubbies has like old sketchbooks and art supplies and things like that in it. So if I make room in my art supplies cubby by cleaning it like I should, then I would have room to put that, and that would give me another little bin. But I also don't feel like doing that. And then the other thing that I could be doing right now is right there on my sewing table is the cotton sateen pieces, which are already cut out, and the silk satin below that, which hasn't been cut out. And because it's silk satin, I am currently going through cutting anxiety on it, and I don't want to cut it out yet. So right now it's just me trying to come up with excuses on why I shouldn't be doing a thing. I really should be doing a thing right now, but I think for now I'm going to go ahead and watch this historically accurate Jane Porter, and then maybe I'll do something after that. I did eventually get over myself and cut out the sateen. And I did this using the actual pattern pieces of the cotton sateen so I could make sure the seam allowances were correct. Basically, I wanted to get the pieces as close to being the same shape as possible. So you'll see here where I actually just, when I cut them out, I don't add in seam allowance because the seam allowance has already been added to the cotton sateen layer. I also marked out the stitch line and the boning channels with a heat friction pen. So when you iron it, the lines will actually disappear, and they disappeared pretty much almost entirely on the cotton sateen, and they only left like little ghost lines in on the satin that were covered by the stitching lines anyway, so it was all fine. And then I went ahead and basted the 2 layers of each panel together so that when I went to stitch together the panels, they didn't shift around during the stitching process. This is just a necessary extra step if you wanted everything to turn out nice and neatly. And now, I'm not sure what it was about the silk Faced Satin, but it really, really wanted to curl up on the edges. You could really see it on the edge there where no matter how much I press it and how hot the iron was, it did not want to lie straight. But I did go ahead and give everything a nice press so that it sat nice and flat and nice and neat. And then for the facing where the grommets would be and where the busk would be, I went ahead, well this is a busk, and what I did was I went ahead and poked holes in the silk with an awl, but not in the satin. Because a busk has like little notches on top where they slide through the front of the corset, but it's just a flat bar on the other side, so you really only want the holes on one side for those little notches to push through. I didn't finish these, I didn't fray check, I didn't do anything like that, which I probably should have, but I also couldn't be bothered, so these were just pushed into place, and then the fabric was folded over and then basted into place to be stitched down later. I didn't want to do pins because that would be too much finagling and poking around and shifting around under the sewing machine, stitching that busk into place, so basting it worked so much better, and then I was able to get a tighter, neater line. You see me pinning it first and then I basted it after the fact. And once I had all of the pieces seamed together, I went ahead and started adding in the boning channels. So if the boning channels were on a panel outside of the seam allowance, then as I stitched on each panel, I would move along and add the boning channel, and I went all in the same direction because I was trying to reduce the amount of wrinkling of the fabric, and I didn't really accomplish that. They just kind of wrinkled anyway. But it is a thing though, if you keep your stitching lines going the same direction, it does reduce the amount of wrinkling that would be in your fabric. I think in this case it wrinkled so much because I might have cut it all on the straight again, and I think some of it should have been on a just slight bias. And for this I also left the seam, the raw side, I guess the seams on the outside, because they were going to be trimmed down to size and covered with boning channels anyway. Here I'm just marking the boning channel that goes on the front side panel so that I could stitch it into place. Again, that's with the heat friction pen that would just come off with an iron. As you can see, magically disappearing. And once everything was stitched into place, I went ahead and ironed it all nice and tidy because you want those nice crisp edges. Always, always, always iron your seams. That's lesson like 2 in sewing. Iron your seams. So I ironed the seam open flat, and then I flipped it over and just pressed it again to get a nice crisp edge. Now the boning channels for this were just cut out of the same silk faced satin as the body of the corset was. I just cut out strips of the silk and then ironed it into thirds. It's like a single fold strip, I suppose. And then I just pinned them right over the seam allowances to where I can just slide a bone into place there. So the boning channels are on the exterior of the corset. Okay, so this is where I should have cut out the strips on a bias, but I was just being stingy with fabric, because bias cut strips do take up more fabric. So I cut it on the straight of grain, and it ended up twisting on me upon installation. But this is me cutting out the bias strip, but not really on the bias, the binding for the corset, to encase the upper and lower raw edges. I think I cut them about 2 inches wide, and then stitched on, folded it over, and tucked under the raw edge and hand stitched the other side. Okay, so status update on the corset. It is pretty much done. I have all the boning inserted. I have it bound. I went ahead and attached a little ribbon on either side of the top just so I could just tie it right there. Flossing is something I'm still not sure on what I'm going to do, as well as whether I'm going to do hand-sewn eyelets or grommets. Grommets I know are stronger, but they also require hammering the little bits in with a hammer and a board, and that's noisy, so not sure. So I think I'm going to leave it at this for now, and oh my god, the shape in this is just unreal. It's amazing the difference between working off of a pattern that you could just buy somewhere versus working off of extant garments. Because originally I tried using a Laughing Moons pattern, and no dig against those patterns, but I think they're intended for like beginners versus something like this, which was pulled from a pair of extant stays from Nora Woe's book. So when I did a mock-up of the other ones, I did not get this dramatic shaping that you're seeing going on here. This is purely done within the pattern, not really done by the shaping of the boning or anything like that. In fact, it actually has better shape when I take the boning out, because these kind of straighten it out a little bit more than it wants to sit. But it really, it's all in the patterning, and that's what creates the shape. And that shape could be further exaggerated by padding that's inserted, which is always fun things too. We might look into that at a later date, but for now I'm just trying to determine whether or not I'm going to do hand-sewn eyelets or whether I'm going to do grommets. I'll make that decision tomorrow, because I don't think I should be making a decision like that at 3 in the morning, which it currently is. So. Okay, so I did a couple tests of the grommet setting, and I can't seem to understand how to install them correctly. So they kind of came out a little bit not right. So I think just based on that, we're going to go with eyelets. Yeah, we're going to use eyelets to install these, because that is not pretty. Nope. I still don't understand the mechanics of installing grommets, and until I do, eyelets. And in hindsight, I do consider the decision to do embroidered eyelets a mistake. Honestly, I think they should have been grommets. So that is something I'm going to have to get over myself in the future and learn how to do properly, because that would have been a far cry better than the eyelets I chose to do. And here is the finished result. Now for my first time making a Victorian corset out of silk, I'm quite proud of it. I I still need to add a hook to hook the laces onto, and the corset itself doesn't completely lace closed in the back either. The drawstring was also unnecessary, and of course I've still got that wrinkling along the sides. But overall, I do think it came out well, and I think it's very pretty, and I am very proud of it. So I